So we're starting a new unit and we're putting proteins behind us, at least for a little while. And the next three chapters are about different classes of molecules. The first one is going to be carbohydrates and sugars. So as always, we're going to give you a little overview and chapter goals for the new chapter. Carbohydrates and sugars are really important for human health. For instance, if you know anybody who's a diabetic, you know that they have to monitor their blood glucose. Glucose is probably the most important sugar we're going to learn about. We're going to be talking about glucose all semester long, so this will be our introduction to it. Sugars and carbs are also very important for nutrition, and we can see that here. Looking at any kind of nutrition label, you've got total carbohydrates right here. You got sugars. You also have dietary fiber, which is another type of carbohydrate that we're going to talk about. So what's the difference between all those things? Lastly, we've got the fact that our cells in our body are often coated with sugars. And for instance, we have different types of blood groups on the surface of your erythrocytes. Maybe you're an A blood type or a B blood type or AB or even O. This is all determined by the sugars that we have attached to the surfaces of our cells. Okay, let's get into our notes. And here we are for carbohydrates. And the unit goals are going to be first to identify the chemical differences between sugars, what we would call monosaccharides, things like glucose and galactose and mannose, fructose. The second one is to take what we learn about monosaccharides and link them together using what we call glycosidic bonds to make disaccharides and polysaccharides. And that's going to give us some of the complexity that we see in the human body. Let's finish this video out by talking about the various functions of carbohydrates. First of all, as you probably know, carbohydrates serve as fuel. This is sort of a short-term energy source for us. We use glucose in our diet as a fuel mostly for short-term things like sprints and maybe 5K type length of activity. We're certainly going to talk about that a lot in this class. Next, sugars and carbohydrates are involved with structure. And this is true in the human body, but it's most notable in plants where cellulose, which is really what makes wood strong and holds up trees and plants, the fibers of cellulose, that is made from a sugar glucose, just polymerized together with glycosidic bonds. Third, we have nucleic acid structures. In a few chapters, we're going to be talking about DNA and RNA. And you may remember from high school biology that nucleic acids are composed in part of pentose sugars like ribose and deoxyribose. And lastly, and what I think is really the most interesting part, is the identification aspect of sugars and carbohydrates. What do I mean by that? Well, like I said on the previous page, all the cells in your body have sugars coating them. And the genetic differences between people result in different sugar structures on the surface of our cells. That's why we can't share tissues. We can't simply take a liver or a heart or a lung and pass it to somebody else. I mean, we can do that, but we would have immune reactions to that. That's all based on the way that our immune system responds to mostly sugars, a little bit proteins too, but mostly the differences in sugars. And I mentioned before that blood types, AB, ABO, that kind of thing is all dependent on sugars on the surfaces of our blood cells. So that last one, because we have a great need for diversity and identification of cells, species, and individuals within a species, we need a lot of diversity of sugar types. And so that's really one of our themes here, is to look at all the different sugars we can make and all the different ways we can modify them to have different sugar structures to serve these purposes.